Jeff Bezos' Washington Post is in turmoil. A tug of war over the political direction of the paper is at the heart of this drama. It began in October when Bezos made the decision that the paper would not endorse a presidential candidate in the next month's election. Many in the newsroom were upset about that decision. There were several high-profile resignations and hundreds of thousands of readers canceling their subscriptions. There was much debate, including on this show, as to whether that was an overreaction by the woke left or a signal of real danger. Now, the latest act surrounding the billionaire's newspaper came Friday after Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial cartoonist Telnaes resigned.
In her Substack, she wrote, quote, "The cartoon that was killed criticizes the billionaire tech and media chief executives who have been doing their best to curry favor with incoming President-elect Trump. There have been multiple articles recently about these men with lucrative government contracts and an interest in eliminating regulations making their way to Mar-a-Lago. The group in the cartoon included Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook and Meta founder and CEO, Sam Altman, AI CEO, Patrick Soon-Shiong, the LA Times publisher, the Walt Disney Company, ABC News, and Jeff Bezos, Washington Post owner. She went on to write, quote, "As an editorial cartoonist, my job is to hold powerful people and institutions accountable. For the first time, my editor prevented me from doing that critical job," end quote. So the tension here is whether this is a clampdown on free speech or not. Robby?
Not. I mean, you have free speech rights vis-a-vis the government. You don't have free speech rights vis-a-vis your employer. It's not even an argument. So
no.
You can, now, while do I think it is better for employers in creative fields and public advocacy and education awareness to permit a wide swath of dissent, including internally and against the company itself? Yes, I think that is a best practice. But, you know, if any employee bad-mouthing their employer without explicit permission runs the risk of having the employer say you can't do that because it's a private organization and they can set whatever rules for their standards of speech that they want. And Jeff Bezos doesn't want to print in a cartoon in the paper that he owns, that he paid for with his money, that's criticizing him. I mean,
yeah.
What can you say? He doesn't have to. Sorry.
So first of all, I do think it's completely fair to make the distinction. Free speech is a protection from speech from sanction by the government. Yeah. And people often obscure that distinction. Myself and our friend Amber Duke were discussing this last week in the context of Elon Musk and various things that he was doing. So that is fair enough. I do think that there is an issue with a timidity on the part of some of these newspaper owners when it comes to criticisms of Trump in particular. And I also think, and I think we have a degree of common ground here, I think it is counterproductive, actually, particularly in relation to that issue of the Washington Post endorsement. Everyone knew the Washington Post was going to endorse Kamala Harris. It would have changed 0 votes had they done so. And instead, Bezos intervened and just stoked this very negative news cycle about censorship or about him imposing his will on the paper. There have been people who have left. As we said in the introduction, there have been thousands of subscribers, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, 250,000 I believe the number was, subscribers who have left. And I think, and our control room will put me right if I am getting this wrong, there's some suggestion of layoffs coming at the Washington Post.
Is that being yes, that is
reported?
Correct.
Yeah, so.
Well, the newspaper endorsements thing, newspaper endorsements are, to my mind, kind of odd.
I mean, I don't think they have changed.
I don't think they change anything. Yeah. I also think it is weird that newspapers, or media endorsements, media's is their corporations. They're large business organizations with financial interests. So for all the bemoaning of corporate influence over politics that often comes from the editorial pages of these very papers, it seems then weird for them to, like, they're critical of how much influence, I don't know, name whatever corporation you want. Johnson & Johnson. I'm critical of Johnson & Johnson too. It's fine. How much influence Johnson & Johnson has over, but does Johnson & Johnson put out a statement saying, here is who I think you should vote for? No, but the Washington Post does and the New York Times does. It's kind of odd to me.
Yeah.
So I would just not do them. So I had no problem with him saying, now, it should not be, we're not doing them just because we don't want to offend Donald Trump. I too take umbrage at the level of we don't want to defend Donald Trump. Part of that is, I think, reacting and maybe overreacting to years of, if we Nazi Donald Trump to death, we will make it not socially acceptable to be a supporter of him, and this will defeat him, which is a kind of strategy that even many in the business community who are otherwise disposed toward Republican economic policies adopted. That clearly didn't work, and maybe they've gone too far the other way and saying, well, now we will go out of our way not to invoke his ire. I don't like that. I don't like them doing this because they're just afraid of the person in charge of the government. That's not good. But at the end of the day, this was specific. I mean, Jeff Bezos was pointed out and mocked in this cartoon. Now, if I were him, I would say you look more magnanimous, not retaliating against this kind of thing. You look a little weak and small-minded, but it's his paper.
Yeah.
And he permits a wide range of divergent views in it, and I think that's good and proper. But you're not going to get. I'm sorry, this is just true. Yeah. You're not going to get very far in life bashing the hell out of your employer.
No, I mean, I think that part is true. Just briefly on the endorsement point, I agree that particularly in national elections, they make no difference at all. I do think there are some rare instances where, for example, as you know, I used to live in New York, and the New York Times endorsement in city Democratic primaries could be influential because basically all the Democratic voters in New York are reading the New York Times, and there isn't that much to distinguish.
Maybe for the local paper, they're giving you actually tangible information on your city council that you genuinely don't know about what their policies are.
Which is very, very different from the Washington Post if it had gone ahead with that endorsement of Harris. But I do think that, to harken back to this point about whether proprietors are avoiding offense to Donald Trump. I do think that is a legitimate concern in Bezos' case. Around the time of the endorsement furor, there were also executives from his space exploration company who were holding some kind of meeting. It all seemed, or maybe it was a phone call, but we're in some level of contact. So I think that is just doesn't smell right to a lot of people who want papers or news organizations generally to proceed without fear or favor, as the old phrase is. In relation to Bezos personally, I 100% agree with you. It would be much better, I think, a much better look to just let cartoons run, even if they're mocking of him. It would cause a ripple rather than these rather grandiose debates like the one we're having.
Yes, it was not a particularly clever cartoon.
No, it wasn't. It's
pretty obvious what
cartoon.
its meaning is. Yeah. So there's no accounting for taste either, I suppose. But it would be better just to print it and then you don't, the Streisand effect, right? Now we're talking about it because they said no. Mm-hmm. We've seen the cartoon. There's more discussion of it and whether he's thin-skinned, and you're better just letting it go. But but at the end of the day, free speech, just a restraint on government. Now we can use our free speech to criticize, but you don't have a First Amendment right to have a editorial cartoonist position at a newspaper. You have a right not to be imprisoned for the cartoon. That you definitely have. More Rising right after this.